Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion. So glad to have you joining us on this very rainy Saturday in Indianapolis for what we hope will be an impactful and very powerful conversation. My name's Ebony Chappelle, and I will be serving as your moderator today. I also serve as program and communications manager for Leadership Indianapolis, in addition to hosting Open Line Show on 106.7 WTLC and Hot 96.3 every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. And I'm so happy to serve as your moderator today. This event is The Silent Pandemic, Addressing Domestic Violence Issues and Solutions in the Black Community. I want to recognize the sponsors and the organizers who put together today's event: CICF, NO Power, the Halo app, and of course, the Indianapolis Recorder Newspaper, which I'm the former editor of once upon a time back in the day. And I am so thrilled. This year they are celebrating 125 years of preparing a conscious community today and beyond through upholding journalistic integrity and telling stories that cut to the heart of who we are as a community. And they also take it off the page by having events such as the one that you're attending now, where we are going to be discussing something very, very important, and that is the issue of domestic violence. Earlier this week, Shauna Majors, who is one of our panelists that you will hear from a little bit later, she penned a piece in the Recorder talking about a partnership that is happening between the Office of Public Health and Safety, the Domestic Violence Network, who you're also going to hear from today, Families First, Silent No More, who you're also going to hear from today, and CICF, the Central Indiana Community Foundation, who helped to put this event together with the other sponsors. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but to kind of set the tone for the discussion. We know that domestic violence is an issue that many people are aware of, at least on some level. It has been glamorized and put into movies and things like that, but the true stories of the victims are something that often falls on deaf ears. And frankly, we're not always aware of what it looks like. Sometimes we just think when you hear the words domestic violence, you think about a bruised and battered woman. Sometimes the wounds are wounds that you cannot see. Sometimes the victim is not a woman. There is just a lot that is to be discussed. So before I get too far on my soapbox, I want to introduce our panelists for today, and to also encourage you, if you have any questions, you're watching us on Facebook, go ahead and put something in the chat in Facebook, and someone will gather those questions for me, and I'll be able to ask them a little bit later on in the program. But I want to get started by introducing our panelists and getting this discussion going. So one of our panelists is Dr. Danita N. Hudson, and she is a counselor at the Well Counseling and Consulting Group, LLC. Hi, Danita. Happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Ebony.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Up next, we have Ms. Shauna Majors. Shauna serves as Director of Community Violence Reduction for the City of Indianapolis. Hi, Shauna. Happy to have you here.
Hi, happy to be here. Hello, everybody.
We also have with us Ash Powell, who serves as Training Services Coordinator for the Domestic Violence Network. Hi, Ash.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here today.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. We also have Ms. Daniette Smith, who is the founder of Silent No More Incorporated. Hello, Daniette.
Hello, Ebony. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Sylvia Strom, who is an advocate for La Plaza Incorporated. Hello, Sylvia.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to start off with a question that is for each one of our panelists. I want to have you all answer this. And I'm just going to go in the order of who is on my screen. So Sylvia, I'll get started with you. And the question is, what is one thing that we need to know about domestic violence and its impact on our entire community?
Domestic violence exists in all communities, the white, the Black, the Latino, all communities. It does not discriminate. It does not discriminate between sex, age, race, color, sexual orientation, how much money you make, or what part of town you live in. Most domestic violence goes unreported, and it causes a lot of women to face poverty. I am a survivor of domestic violence. I am a Latina survivor of domestic violence. My mother was a survivor. My grandmother was a survivor. I didn't realize this until I got into this field about 17 years ago, until I started going through the training. And I remember walking out of there stunned, saying, oh my God, I am a survivor of domestic abuse. So is my mother and my grandmother. So looking back, this was in my first marriage, and now with what I know, I realize I can see it through a different lens, in that I grew up in an abusive household. My father was very controlling. I only saw physical abuse once, and my grandfather was very controlling. In fact, I think all my aunts were also abused on my mother's side. So I grew up thinking this behavior was normal. And the young man I married, and my high school sweetheart, because I wanted to get out of my abusive home, I married the first boy that would have me. And as luck would have it, he also grew up in an abusive home. But in his home, there was a lot of physical violence. So when I married, that abuse continued. But added to the control was the physical violence, which was something that was news to me. I didn't tell my parents. I thought that was something that was to be kept at home, because when I grew up, it was kept at home. It was not something we talked about. I was fortunate in that we had a son, and after he was about 2 years old, one day I just decided, this is it. I'm not putting up with this any longer. And I was one of the lucky ones. I was one of the lucky ones because I left. I got up and said, this is it. I went home, I got a divorce, and I swore that no one would do that to me again. And fortunately, that hasn't happened. And now I've been married, 28 years in a healthy relationship. And my son did not grow up seeing this because he was only 2 years old. Consequently, he also has a healthy relationship. So what I want to bring across is that this can happen to anyone. Thank you.
Sylvia, I just want to say thank you so much for your vulnerability and transparency. What a way to bring us into this serious conversation. I also want to highlight the power of your voice in speaking out, because it was able to really transform generations upon generations of violence. So now we get to move into a new way of being. I want to pose that same question to you, Danita. Dr. Danita, excuse me.
Okay, you can call me Danita, that's fine.
You know what, I'm one of those people, a little sidebar, I really believe in like calling people like their title or whatever it is that they would like for me to call them. I have a friend that's a reverend, and I greet her as reverend, and I know it gets on her nerves, but that's just how I am. But the same question for you. What is something that people absolutely need to know about how domestic violence impacts our entire community?
Okay, I have about 4 points that I'd like to make. Coming from the realm of being a mental health counselor, I think it's important for people to understand that domestic violence is a health issue. It is a health issue in our community. That 52% of murders of Black women are by intimate partners. I also want people to understand that domestic violence is about power and control. And lastly, what I think it's important for us to understand so that we can provide the help that the Black community needs, as well as people who are experiencing domestic violence can seek the help, is to understand that there is an intersection between sexism and racism when it comes to violence in our community. And part of that is domestic violence is about objectification. It's about, the abuse of sexuality, and racism keeps us from seeking the help that we need to make the changes that we need, that we can better ourselves, our loved ones, and our community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Danita, for your thoughtful response and hitting on those points that are so important for people to know, to bring us into another aspect of it, I want to transition to Ms. Daniette Smith. If you could answer that same question, what is something that we absolutely need to know about how domestic violence impacts not only the victims and the survivors, but has an impact on our entire community?
The one thing that I can think of is that domestic violence is silent. It is something that your neighbor or anyone that you're next to can experience. So we don't want to, just because you don't know that they're not going through it, we don't want to exclude anyone from it. And again, like they said, whether it's a Black, white, Latino, or whatever race that individual may be. Speaking from as a survivor, as well as an African-American woman, I will say when it comes to the silence, I want to make sure that our African-American women don't stand in the stereotype that we are loud, we are bitter, and we are angry, and don't let that stereotype threat stop you from speaking up and getting the help and the assistance you need. So that's that one thing that I really think of when I think of domestic violence, is the silence that plays along or plays a part with it.
Again, very thoughtful response. Thank you. And that silence is so, at the root of this, and the reason why it's so hard to really capture and to deal with. And that's the reason why we named this event the silent pandemic. Right now, we're watching all over our nation and our world, people suffer with loss of their finances and loss of, certain freedoms and, other things impacting them. And that's this global virus pandemic that we're dealing with. But the silent pandemic of domestic violence ravages communities in those very similar ways as well. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Ash, same question for you. You work with the Domestic Violence Network and you see all different types of intimate partner violence. What is something that we need to know about how it impacts our entire community?
Yeah, I think for a long time, the one thing that I would like to point out is that throughout my time working in domestic violence prevention, a sentiment or a phrase that I hear quite often is that domestic violence is a women's issue. But within this, I want to kind of reframe that, because we do see that domestic violence impacts so many more people than just women. And we know that when the domestic violence movement got started, initially who it was essentially serving was white, cisgender, heterosexual women. However, we know that this impacts so many more people. We know that there's a disproportionate impact in the Black and African American community. We also know there's a disproportionate impact on the LGBTQ plus community. And in particular, we see a massive impact when those two identities intersect. So for our Black and African American LGBTQ plus individuals. And so the big thing that a phrase that I like is that instead of thinking as domestic violence as a women's issue, I think we need to start thinking about it as a human issue, because it impacts all of us.
Thank you so much, Ash. It is a human issue. It's something that impacts all of us. Shauna, you'll be the last person to answer this question, but from your perspective, violence prevention, working with the city, we just heard Ash mention this is a human issue. What do we need to know from your perspective and experience about why this impacts the whole community and everyone should care about it?
So thank you all again for having me. This intimate partner violence or domestic violence is extremely critical for all of us to understand. As Ash pointed out, it is a human pandemic situation. And I think for me, as a kid growing up in a household with alcoholic, abusive father, controlling, which I love my dad. I always have to say that because people, but I thought that for me was if a man wasn't punching on me, I wasn't being abused. And as my work, as Miss Sylvia mentioned, getting into my work, especially in this role, I've really come to grasp that it's more than that. It's, someone always got a tracking your location on your phone. You need to know where you are. If you turn that location off, you're in trouble. If you're late coming home and you haven't called, and that anxiety that is created even in the children. And so really, I think what's important is that we understand that this is another layer of violence in our community, not just what we see on TV as the gun violence all the time. There's this piece that needs to be recognized and worked with as well. And so it falls under my purview in my office. And this is why I reached out to these partners to have this discussion today, because I think, especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've been quarantined for months, I thought about how these children and these parents that were in these abusive relationships in these homes have to be feeling trapped, because you had school before, you had work before. And so if you've been laid off or you're working from home and your kid, everybody's at home, that has to be a miserable existence. And so that was one of the things that kind of spurred this partnership that I think we'll get into a little bit later.
We will definitely get into this a little bit later. And thank you so much, Shauna, not only for your response, but to all of you for your work that you're doing in the community. We are going to hear a little bit about that later. And it highlights some really important points about how it looks a lot of different ways. It impacts people on so many different levels. So Dr. Danita, I want to start out with you. Bring us into some of the warning signs that people should be aware of intimate partner violence.
Okay. Thanks, Ebony, for the question. I think the number one sign is fear. Fear is something that if you see it, you hear it from a friend, a loved one, a coworker, it's something that you definitely pique your interest. And it's something, if you're trying to figure out whether this is a violent, abusive relationship, that's something that's a teller for you, is that you have that sense of fear. Other signs are isolation, isolating the person from loved ones and friends, making it difficult for them to connect with people who care about them, is another sign. There's also, you can hear phrases, use things like, he or she just wants me to, to do better, or am I crazy? Or things that like really speak to them not having that power and control to make their own decisions, but more that they have to rely on someone else to do it. Those are all warning signs.
Wow. So you really gave us some things to think about in terms, because I even think about experiences I've had and someone mentioning, oh, such and such is just crazy. Oh, girl, he be calling me all the time, and, different things like that, and how that can be a trigger, especially, starting to create that level of codependency as well. So where people are isolated and have to depend on that person. Wanted to have a follow-up question to that. If you could put names to the different types of abuse. I know I've heard about financial abuse before, which is one that doesn't get as much attention. But if you could kind of put some names to the different categories or pockets that this can fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all used to hearing about physical abuse, and those signs are, for most part, are pretty, they're pretty, overt. We see them, we recognize when someone's been hit, slapped, punched, kicked. We know what those signs might look like, although those that have been abused may try to hide them. Of course, there's sexual abuse, and sexual abuse can be in some ways similar to emotional abuse, meaning that they talk about your sexual performance in a negative way. They try to make you feel like the person tries to make you feel like you are not sexually desirable, that they're doing you a favor by being with you in a sexual way. Those are all ways that one can experience sexual abuse. There's also using the children. In some relationships where there's children, threatening the children can be a form of abuse. Keeping you from your children can be a form of abuse. Those are things that you need to consider. And then there's also things like intimidation and, again, isolation. Those are all forms of abuse. Again, threatening, violence, threatening to tell someone one of your secrets could be a form of abuse. And control and overprotection, that you're being driven everywhere that you go, that you have to, they don't want you to spend time with friends without them. These are all things that people can feel like, oh, this is a sign of love, when in all actuality, it might be the beginning of something that could be more severe. And then one thing that when Ash was talking about the LGBTQ plus community, one way, and this is also for women, of course, but the use of societal privileges, like threatening to out you can be a form of abuse in the LGBT culture. Saying things to a woman such as, you know, your role, your place, what women are to do, how I am the one that is the head of the family. Those can all be forms of abuse.
Thank you so much for explaining that to us. One thing that I wanted to hit on really quickly with the sexual abuse part is the lack of consent. So you mentioned about like withdrawing sex from someone or making them feel like they're not desirable. But what about the flip side of making someone do things that they don't want to do and haven't consented to?
Absolutely. Rape is a form of domestic violence. It can occur in an intimate relationship. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that people forget about when they are in an intimate relationship or a marriage. And yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that part. Thank you so much. So moving right along with our questions, Ash, in your work with the Domestic Violence Network, what would you add to that list of specific things to look for? And Shauna mentioned this earlier, and if I need to come back to this question, let me know. I don't mind repeating. But what are some of the trends that you all have seen since the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I can definitely chime in on that. And Danita, thank you so much. That was an extremely comprehensive list of just things to look out for. I think one thing that maybe I would add to that is that we also even see this occur digitally. And so this is something that we in particular see, especially with our young people. So some of the work we do at DVN is with high school students, and this is definitely prevalent there. But we see this with adults as well. And I believe Shauna mentioned something about this earlier, but this can look like, you know, sending someone multiple texts all at once or calling them over and over again. And we could also see this even occur through insisting on having access to all social media passwords and accounts, saying, you know, I need to be able to get into your phone whenever I want to and go through your messages. And even insisting on location services being turned on. And so they can essentially see where they are at all times. And then something else I would add to the conversation of sexual abuse is something that we can also see is reproductive coercion or birth control sabotage. And so that's essentially, that can look a lot of different ways, but it could be poking holes in condoms, taking birth control medication and disposing of it. And we can even see there have been some very extreme cases where even birth control methods such as IUDs being forcibly removed by abusers. And so that is definitely a very serious form of birth control sabotage. But
and I wanted to jump in really quick on that one and see if you could talk about the concept of stealthing. Are you familiar with that concept?
I don't think I've heard the term stealthing before, but would you mind talking about it? Because I might know about it.
Yeah, so it is in that realm of the reproductive abuse, but it is basically someone consenting to having sex with a condom and then their partner removing it without the other person's consent.
Yeah, that would definitely fall into that reproductive coercion or birth control sabotage piece. So yeah, consenting like, oh yeah, we'll definitely use protection and removing it. I feel like even poking holes in condoms could even fall within that as well. Yeah, absolutely. And then there was also the piece on COVID that you would like for me to touch on as well. Yeah, so we've actually seen a really staggering increase in cases as far as COVID goes with data and just what we've seen. So we have seen a 125 increase in calls and a 117% increase in actual cases. And this is in comparison to looking at numbers from the past 3 years. And so that is already just a massive increase that we're seeing. And this is just what's being reported too. And so I think a big factor here is housing. Something that we've been working on at Domestic Violence Network and partnering with some of our organizations such as Families First is providing hotel funds. So we've been able to connect those who are in need to an advocate at Families First and get them in a hotel as a way to address this during COVID.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I know that we're going to hear a little bit more about this partnership to help with housing later when we talk with Shauna. But thank you so much for highlighting that. One follow-up question for you in terms, you mentioned that you are working with young people. Can you give us an idea of the ranges in the communities that Domestic Violence Network is working with specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So as of right now, our youth program goes into primarily high schools, and we go into middle schools sometimes as well. We actually have a partnership with IPS schools, and this always makes me so excited because we're able to go into pretty much every IPS high school in the community. And so we have a several day long program. So normally when we're in classrooms, we're there for at least 4 days to 6 days, of course, prior to COVID-19. That's changing a little bit as of right now. But yeah, we do that to make sure that we're getting in front of young people, because we do see sometimes these can even start for young people, these abusive trends within relationships. So kind of trying to break the cycle before it starts.
Which is so important because as we heard earlier from the different personal stories that were shared by the panelists, if you grow up in an environment where you see that and begin to normalize it in your mind, you think that that's how relationships work. And then you repeat those patterns and repeat them and repeat them. So kudos to you all for doing that work. Danielle, gonna come to you next. From the perspective of a survivor, what is it that outside people don't understand about what it's like and the barriers that prevent victims from seeking help? I asked that question specifically because I just witnessed a conversation the other day with a man saying that he was tired of getting involved in the relationship issues of his female friends that are dating guys that are violent, because every time he tries to help, they don't listen and they just keep going back and going back. And it just made me think of things that I've experienced in my own life. So I want you to help explain to people why it's deeper than that, because I think people just get stuck on, why can't they just stop?
Yes.
So what can you share with us about that?
Definitely. I think most of the times the outside people don't understand the cycle of abuse and that cycle that most victims sit in with that tension stage, the abuse stage, and when that honeymoon stage comes back around. Most abusers understand and know exactly what that victim needs during that time of leaving. So they come back with that honeymoon stage and provides them or even offer them everything that they need. And it's one of the most crucial times, whether that victim is leaving home or has escaped that home, maybe in a shelter, maybe living with someone else. If they provide that need and be who they are supposed to be off top, then it gives that victim a sense of hope that change will occur. So then it goes back to that second chance or that third chance, because as a survivor and even myself, I seen the potential and I knew the potential that my abuser had. So I always looked at the good side of things and that hope. I sat on that hope for so long. So most of the times those victims sit on that hope. They don't understand the cycle that they're in until it is explained to them or until it's educated. Family and friends don't understand the cycle that victims are in. So when they say, well, why don't they leave? Or they start to pass judgment because they haven't left. They don't understand that they're shutting a door on a friendship or on a family member, which only makes that victim situation even darker, because now that victim has shut them out. Like, I can't depend on you, or I can't even use your ear, even if you don't say anything else. So then it becomes alone. So I think that's one of the things that the community or the people on the outside should understand is, what is that cycle? What is that one thing that's holding that victim there? Because no victim wants to stay in an abusive relationship. There's something that's holding them there. So just understanding the cycle of abuse, and then getting that reasoning of why that victim won't stay or will stay is one of the things that I think that the community or those on the outside that's looking in should understand, most definitely.
Thank you so much for bringing that awareness to it. A follow-up question to that. We have some service providers here. You're a service provider yourself. What is the thing that service providers can understand about serving victims of domestic violence? You know, I was a service provider at my previous job, and while I was doing something completely different, I had to work really hard to figure out what people's needs were and try to appeal to them on that level. So I'm just curious to know, when it comes to victims of domestic violence, if I'm a service provider and I want to reach that community, what are the do's and the don'ts of how to do that?
I think the good thing about working as an advocate for domestic violence is most of the advocates have experienced the domestic violence, or they have been in a situation with family members, so they understand what exactly that victim may need, just even from a mental aspect of things. And then they go into the conversation with the victim. So each individual person has their own different need. So it really just depends on that individual. But I would think it just stems from that person. What is the need? Is it an emergency? Is it something that we need to remove them from the home immediately? Is it a job? Is it housing? I'm trying to identify what that need is for that particular individual, and then making sure we refer them to the services that they need. But ultimately, it's done from the heart. It's done. I do this because I am who I needed when I was going through the domestic violence. So from there, you just put yourself in their shoes and meet them exactly at their level, and then you pull them up and hopefully out of that domestic violence situation.
Thank you again. One last question for you on this round. When you said, I am what I needed, that just stuck out to me so much. And I read a bit about your personal story. What was the thing that really empowered you to move and to try to turn that page in your life from what you experienced before?
The one thing that had me move was my children. That's what really got me out of it. One, because I was in school already, so I knew the damage that it was causing on my children. But I had to get to that fed up point, unfortunately. I did not have a service provider. I did not have an advocate in my ear educating me on what I was in. It was college. It was a book that I was in, and the only thing that was missing was me and my children's names out of that abuse book. Once I was alone, truthfully, I was alone. It was only me and my kids. By that time, I was judged by family members because I had went back more than 7 times. I was pretty much judged by everyone around me, and the people that I did have around me, they had been abused. So they were more so clinging onto it, more so than trying to pull me out of it. So that support was there as a friend, but they didn't understand that it was only dangerous for them to come in with me more so than trying to pull me out of it. So just being who I am was being a voice, because I knew I was voiceless. I had no voice during that time. I didn't know anybody that could relate to me. I felt I was alone because I didn't know anybody who shared the same story and was willing to give it to me with encouragement and give it to me with strength, more so than me and that person sitting around crying in our own sorrows because we're both stuck, or they're still stuck. Even though they're out of it. So that was that main thing of being who I am, trying to connect with those resources and services that are out in Indianapolis or in Indiana, and then getting them what I couldn't get, what I didn't know was available to me at that time.
Yeah, thank you again. And we are going to get a little bit deeper into those resources and what is available. Sylvia, you mentioned earlier that you, like some other people on the panel, are a survivor of domestic violence, coming from the Latino community. What can you tell us about how that looks. Like, do things look differently in that community than in others? And what is La Plaza doing specifically to help victims of domestic violence in the community that you serve?
Okay, thank you. So much like in the Black community and the white community, it looks a lot the same for the Latino immigrant community. However, Latino immigrants, abusers, have many more ways that they can abuse their victim. For instance, they can hide documents, passports, IDs, children's documents, making it harder for them to get resources, isolating them from family and friends, maybe not wanting them to speak to anyone that speaks their language for fear that they might tell them what's going on, not allowing them to learn English. If they're married to a US citizen or a US resident, they may promise them that they're going to fix their legal status, and that date never comes. I have had many clients that they'll say things like, oh, when the taxes come, then we'll have money to go to an attorney. Well, then they spend it on something else. Or they get mad at them about some incident, and they use that as an excuse of not to do it. So that's another way of controlling them. Threatening to oust them to their family, telling them lies about them, telling them that they're prostitutes, things like that. Not allowing her to work, or maybe allowing her to work but taking all her money. They do control the money a lot. Threatening to call immigration is probably the biggest thing. If you call the police, if you tell anyone what's going on, I'm going to call immigration and report you. And they'll say this even if they're undocumented as well, and the women don't know their rights. So if they don't know their rights, what are they going to do? They're going to believe what he tells her. I can't tell you how many times clients say, well, he said this was going to happen. He said that if I called the police, that they would take my children away. And I tell them, no, my job is to educate them. On the contrary, if you stay and the abuse continues and they find out, then you're at risk of losing your child, not if you report it and break that cycle. So if they are fortunate enough to be referred to an agency like mine, Families First, Julian Center, a number of others, and hook up with an advocate, advocates can do a lot for them and with them. Crisis intervention, help them through the immediate crisis, help them do safety plan. A safety plan is individual to each case. If necessary, I take them to the police department and help them file that report. The police department is, that's a scary place for anyone. And if you're undocumented, that's even scarier. Assist them in filing a protective order. I can take them, or actually I do it in my own office. Unfortunately with COVID, that process has become more difficult and it's only available in English. So that's much harder process now. I accompany them to their protective order hearings. If there's a criminal case, I accompany them to those cases as well. And then after all this is said and done, I hook them up with an attorney to get them free representation to file for a U visa or file a self-petition if they qualify. And this is life-changing. In the 17 years that I've worked as an advocate, I have helped hundreds, maybe thousands of women get their legal status. Also, I refer clients to therapy, and I facilitate a support group with Reach for Youth in Spanish.
Wow. Thank you so much for highlighting everything it is that you do in a very, the specific things that you do, I think are so important because most people wouldn't even think about that. Like to have someone basically dangle your citizenship in front of you and, take away your records and all of that, like that. Wow. So giving women, or victims rather, giving them the opportunity to own the rest of their life and to have an identity, I think is so, so important. In listening to everything you were saying, I was just thinking, and I want to open this question up to any other panelists that want to jump into this, because you all may have something to share as well. But how do you go about working with a victim and having it be covert so that they don't get caught and nothing bad happens to them. Like, that's one of the things that's running through my mind. Like, this stuff is serious. Like, how does it work that they can get this done, you know, without giving themselves away and putting themselves in more danger?
That's a very good question. That goes back to the safety plan. Each case is different. Sometimes I'll get, we receive right now under COVID text messages at La Plaza as well, not just voice, but text messages, which can be safer for a victim to text La Plaza and say, I need help. And that message gets to me. And then we can text them. They can delete that text. Abusers are notorious for checking their cell phones. I mean, just monitoring them. Even if they see an unusual phone number, you know, who is this? Who are you talking to? I've had abusers call me and say, you know, who are you? Why are you calling my wife or my girlfriend? And they'll say in Spanish. And then I'll say, no hablo. No, I'll say, I don't speak Spanish. I don't know what you're talking about. So then they think it was the wrong number. And I've done it with English speaking, vice versa. You just have to be on top of things. You can't put anything past abusers. They are very smart, and it's our job to educate women to not to be surprised for anything and to try to be one step ahead of them in all ways to keep them safe and keep their children safe.
Thank you, Sylvia.
You're welcome.
Would anybody else like to jump in on that and maybe share from your perspective the things that you have done to help protect victims that are seeking help?
This is Daniette. So for me, it's kind of the same as the planning stage, as Ms. Sylvia said. There are times where I've been talking to a victim before and the abuser came home and we switched it to an interview. It was a job. We switched it to a job interview and set up another time for us when he's not there. We have a catch-up thing that goes around when a victim is being abused. You know, they can inbox or they can text catch-up. And then we automatically know the address already, so we'll send the police there. So there's various ways and different ways, and it's situational for each individual, because some may not have. There's a lot that don't have cell phones at all. So we have to work around a way of trying to get assistance and get them help and get them Uber to get them lifted away from there as soon as possible without a cell phone. So we have to get them while we have them on the phone, or it could be a life and death situation. So it's definitely situational. And like Ms. Sylvia said, it's the planning stage of it all. That planning part is very important and is a life and death situation when it comes to domestic violence.
Thank you, Daniette. Would anybody else like to chime in before we move on? All right. Thank you all. I also want to remind everybody that is watching us on Facebook Live, if you have any questions for the panelists, put them in the chat box and then we will get an alert of those questions and I'll be able to ask them to the panelists. But last but not least, Ms. Shauna Majors, we mentioned earlier about some things that are being done on a city level to bring resources to people and to help them. I want to know, how is your office involved in this work of domestic violence, and what resources presently exist or will soon exist to help victims and their families?
So, excuse me. Again, our office is really about public health and safety, and as part of that domestic violence falls into that. I have worked with majority of the women on this panel and happy to meet a couple more to engage with, and some other partners. So I'm just going to give a brief, really quick synopsis of what we came up with during COVID and where we're kind of going to go from there. So during COVID, like I said, I woke up, it was weird. I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, these kids, so I called Alicia Collins at CICF and I got on the phone with Kelly McBride at DVN. I called Daniette. I called Jennifer at Family First. I'm like, we got to get together. We got to figure out some kind of alternative housing, because during COVID, some of the sheltering was slowed down and not taking people. And so I'm thinking, how in the world can we get folks out right now, and not waiting for things to get better with COVID? And so we all put our collective brains together and we came up with this situation where, and this is a model that I like to use in my work, is I have a grassroots partner, I have a organization partners, and people that can function as advocates in between. And so we also work with IMPD's Witness Assistance Program, as well as the prosecutor's office for these protective orders and things of that nature. So a lot of those services have gone to online, but we really just wanted to see how we could still be out in the community and get this information out to people. And so we went on a canvassing campaign. I had my staff out hanging flyers in English and in Spanish in places. So we attacked places like grocery stores, laundromats, even liquor stores, anywhere where we thought people would come in. We put them in bathroom stalls, so it can be a little discreet. And I think that's one of the ways people advocate is putting the information in bathroom stalls, because, if you got a big burly man coming into the ladies' room, that's going to look a little funny. So we just want the education and the information out, and people are able to call my office for help, and we connect them in with Miss Daniette and Ash and Jennifer over at Families First too, because we're not service providers. We have to be, coordinators and conveners of these services. So that's our role, is to pretty much bring folks together that have the aptitude and the staff to do the work, but we come alongside and we support. And if there's red tape, I have scissors that I like to cut through to get things done for folks. So that's kind of how our office is involved in this, and we want to continue to do it. We started, I've been in my role 2 years now, and we always go to the commemorative, and I think Domestic Violence Network might have my picture on the wall in their office, like, she's coming again for help, run. But I enjoy this work because, again, I watched my mom go through this and others around us, and I remember as a child that fear of not knowing when my dad came home what kind of mood he was in, or if I'm going to say or do something to make him mad. And you wake up every morning, and even with my stepdad, was like, okay, who am I going to encounter today? And so it was just really important to be able to bring some resources together to let people know that there's help and get them that help, and help people move forward. It's so personal for me, again, because I've been in domestic violence relationships myself. And although it wasn't physical, it was bad. I also want to throw in spiritual as another way of control. People use their religion in some ways to say, the Bible says this, you cannot do that, and you won't tell anybody this. And that's another way. So I'm gonna shut up now, but I just wanted to say that is a very passion for me. And I've lost a girlfriend, very close friend. Her husband took her life in front of their 3-year-old son. And so now this boy, that was years ago, but he grew up without a mother and a father. And so when domestic violence hits, especially when it gets to a physical point of no return, it affects everybody in that family, in the community around them. And I saw signs that I didn't move on at the time, because she kept telling me it was okay, even though I knew in my spidey senses that it wasn't. And then he further isolated her away from all of her friends, so we couldn't see or hear what was going on until it was too late. So I've made that part of my life mission now, that I put my work in, and if I hear about it, if I know about it, if I meet good people like the women on this panel that are doing the work, that I need to be in that space as well.
Shauna, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing that. So sorry to hear about your friend. I hate when things like that happen, and then that's the example that we have. I guess the silver lining in the cloud is that it empowers us all to do something a little bit better. So happy to know that that is how it worked out in your situation. You may have another resource. Someone just put in the chat. Sherry Kurtikal, if I'm not mispronouncing that, of Victim's Voice. So they put that information into our Zoom chat box. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. And then yet you had something, so I want to go ahead and give you an opportunity to share.
Nope. So it might be a closing. I could have probably waited until the closing, but piggybacking off of what Shauna was saying in
Go
reference
ahead.
to piggybacking off of what Shauna said in reference to the family trait, like I didn't know there was any history of domestic violence in my family growing up. I didn't learn until January of this year that my mother's jaw was wired shut and that her nose was broken. So sometimes we as our survivors even think that just because their kids didn't see that there isn't an attachment to those homes and that energy that's being released to those kids, just to make sure that you are aware that even though they don't see, there is an attachment that comes from that generational curse. So just wanted to add that on there as well.
Well, thank you so much for adding that, because that brings me into a question to all of the panelists, and that is to give those of us that are friends and family members who may witness some of these things that go on, what are some things that we can do to help positively and not make things worse? In the example what Daniette just shared, not knowing that these things existed, like I imagine, and I might be projecting, so excuse me and let me know if I'm out of line, but I imagine like what would have been the case if you had been made aware of that earlier and maybe was able to have a conversation with your family about why this isn't okay. That's just one of the things that comes to mind for me, because a lot of us people of color in our families, you just kind of keep stuff to yourself. You do not have discussions, certain things. It's like, well, that's their business. That's grown folks' business, or we don't talk about what happens in the house, whatever. And then it creates this environment of silence and then more violence that's allowed to persist. So I just want to open it up to whoever wants to jump in there about the things that people that are in relationship with victims can do to empower them and help them out.
Danielle, if I could say something about that real quickly. A lot of what I find, and I usually work with women and family who are on the other side. So as a mental health counselor, you know, my focus is always of helping you to reach your optimum life, your optimum ability to be well. And so, but when I think about families, I think it's important to stereotypes. And so speaking from the perspective of Black women, sometimes those stereotypes are you have to be strong. You cannot cry. You have to keep it moving. Those are things that we say to ourselves, and our friends and our family perpetrate those stereotypes unintentionally at times. You know, like, girl, you can handle whatever comes your way. You know, I believe in you. Don't let that man make you cry. Things like that we're told do not help, but allowing people the space to express themselves, to be able to talk about their fears, to be able to share their concerns, and just sometimes just sitting with them in the pain is what people need to be at a point of making change. Sometimes we can't fix the problem, and sometimes we don't want to get mad at people because they're not willing to. We just want to sit with them and hold the space so that they're able to express themselves and what their needs are, so they know that you're safe.
Thank you. Anyone else want to join in on that or have anything to add?
I just want to mention that I don't want to forget about our men. I know that there are some men that are experiencing interpartner violence as well. And I would imagine from a male perspective, it's probably a little embarrassing to report something like that sometimes. But for the abusers, I think that the key is to recognize that you have an issue and that, you know, going for counseling is a huge step in working on your own stuff. I also want to say that I know there are certain types of personality ingredients that make for abuse, because, you know, I know several men that grew up in abusive homes as well and have said, "Oh, well, I don't hit a woman, so I'm not an abuser. I broke the curse." But if you don't look at yourself and realize that there's these other things that we all talked about, took notes, you know, with the financial abuse and the sexual abuse and the mental and the emotional and the spiritual and all of those things, you're still an abuser. And so to look at that and try to make yourself well, to be better, if not to save your family, because it's important to you, or to be able to move forward and co-parent or whatever that looks like. So I also think that there's, I'd like to see more services aimed at helping our gentlemen as well, because it is a holistic approach. You can't just, you know, have a plan of action and we get the mom and kids out, but then we leave this man suffering too, because something is going on with him too. And so I just wanted to throw that in as my last 2 cents. I think that we have to watch for those. And if I could just wave my wand and cure us all from all of the generational and cultural things, that baggage that we carry from generation to generation. I think education is really important in understanding the signs, the symptoms, the, you know, the help that's available, and taking advantage of those things. So that would be my last thing to say.
Thank you so much, Shauna. And you took us perfectly as a perfect segue into us wrapping up. So my final question to all of the panelists is just really to open it up. If you have a final thought you would like to share with our viewers, and also if you could tell us where people can find you and take advantage of the resources that you offer. So Sylvia, I will go ahead and get started with you.
Got it. Is that better? All right. So my closing thoughts are this. Every 52 seconds, a woman is victimized by an intimate partner. That's a lot of women. Domestic violence is is a hard thing to talk about. Like some of the panelists mentioned, it's just something that we don't talk about. We've been raised not to talk about. And that unfortunately continues. I think we need to start educating our children that they need to be talking about it. More education, like Ashley and her program that are doing in school, are paramount to starting to change things. Also, if someone comes to you and tells you that they're abused, please believe them. People don't make this up. Believe them and reach out to them and see how you can support them. Remember the resources that you learned here today. There's a lot more resources out there for them. At La Plaza, we can be reached on our Facebook page. It's full of things, information of things that we're doing, things with COVID. We are now giving food out on Fridays. We also have received lots of funds to help with rent and utility bills, which is something that's really helping not only victims of abuse, but just the general public. And always remind women and men and children that there is a way out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, there is a way out. Dr. Danita, same for you. Any final closing thoughts, and where can people connect with you?
My closing thoughts really have to do with the mental health side of things, that the number of survivors of anxiety and that of their children is great. And it's very important for us to take that seriously, that their mental health is something that, like Daniette said, if she had known, it may have made a difference for her, or what Sylvia said about generation after generation after generation. It's one thing to leave an environment, which of course I hope and pray that everyone has that opportunity to do, but there's other work that needs to be done as well. And I don't think that should be ignored. And I would love to encourage women who are survivors and men who are survivors and those in the LGBTQ community who have experienced domestic violence to do the additional work so that they can be healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Danita. Daniette, same for you. Final thoughts, and where can people connect with you?
Yes, my final thoughts is to the victims, just know that there is people out here that can help you. I can be reached, as well as many others on here that are here and ready to pull you through and pull you out of this. To family and friends who know someone who's going through domestic violence, continue to be their ear with no judgment and with no strings attached. If they need help, definitely contact me as a friend. And hopefully we'll be able to, I'll be able to come in and assist with you. And then of course, to all of the advocates and the voices that are on here, I want to thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. That mental aspect is important. That mental piece is important, because most victims don't understand, even though you've got out of it, your children are still in it until you get them out of it as well. And that is pretty much it. You can reach me. I'm on Facebook, Daniette Smith, of course, as well as Silent No More organizations at www.silentnomoreinc.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Ash, same for you. Thank you so much for being on today's panel. But any final thoughts, and where can people connect with the Domestic Violence Network?
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me on this panel. And yeah, I guess as final thoughts would go, I would just say, understand that there is always opportunities out there to learn more about this. Something that we do, or something that I do with Domestic Violence Network, is I run our adult education program. So we've been doing pretty much a virtual training event every week. And so just knowing that there are places that you can learn more about what domestic violence really looks like. And I think another important factor is just knowing about all of the amazing resources that we have in our community. So being able to seek out and just know where you can refer to if a friend or someone you love ever does come to you and discloses. And so just knowing who's in our community, who's doing the work. And as far as final thoughts for Domestic Violence Network, you can find us on Facebook or on Instagram. On Facebook, we are Domestic Violence Network, and then in parentheses, DVN. And on Instagram, you can find us at DVN Connect. And so, yeah, feel free to follow us on either of those. We post all of our training events and what we're up to on there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ash. And Ms. Shauna Majors, to wrap it on up for us, put a nice little bow on it. Any final thoughts? Any more final thoughts? And where can people connect with you in your office?
So we are in the City County building, the Office of Public Health and Safety. My personal email is Shauna, shonna.majors@indy.gov. I don't have the fancy Twitter and all that like everybody else. But please, anytime I have a staff, I have 2 staffers that are dedicated and working with domestic violence, and that's Joaquina Everett and Sade Hoskins, that'll be more than happy to assist with those as well. And any of these lovely people, we all chit chat and talk and touch, each other on a regular basis. So we really try to assist with that. And I think it's important to understand what the abuse is. The mental health component is important. And like Daniette said, be an unjudgmental voice. You guys don't know what that feels like, that for someone to have somebody they can come and talk to about what's going on and not fear of you going back telling the abuser that they told you. And, sometimes you get that in family dynamics, right? You might talk to somebody's cousin or auntie, and next thing you know, he's like, you telling my people what's going on over here? Yeah. So, it takes bravery. It's a lot of fear. It's a tough situation. But just know that there are people out here to help. So if you're in that situation, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we're not going to judge you. We're here to love and help you and move forward. So I hope that the community saw this as a way and learned some ways that they can help, and some places to connect into. And hopefully we can make some progress in this area together.
Thank you so much, Shauna. I believe that we can definitely make some progress. So I want to wrap up a little bit and first start off by thanking each and every one of our panelists that participated today. Dr. Danita Hudson, a counselor with the Well Counseling and Consulting Group, LLC. Shauna Majors, Director of Community Violence Reduction for the City of Indianapolis. Ash Powell, Training Services Coordinator for the Domestic Violence Network. Daniette Smith, founder of Silent No More Incorporated, and Ms. Sylvia Strom, an advocate with La Plaza Incorporated. Thank you to each and every one of you women for being on the panel, for the incredible work that you are doing in the community, and your tireless commitment to making a difference in this very serious area. I also want to say thank you to our partners and the sponsors and organizers who put this event together, Central Indiana Community Foundation, CICF, Power, the Halo app, and of course, the 125-year-old legendary greatest weekly, Indiana's greatest weekly, the Indianapolis Recorder Newspaper, for bringing us together. And to each one of you that attended, I hope that you learned something that can help impact you personally, impact those around you, and to really help those in our community that have been victimized by this silent pandemic of domestic violence. Take care of yourselves. Oh, I forgot to say who I am in case you didn't join at the beginning. I'm bad at that. But anyways, my name is Ebony Chappelle. Very honored to have served as your moderator today. Take care of yourselves and one another. Have a great day and a positive week. Bye.